Welcome everyone to part 2 of the Hyperdrive Bundle series. This is Boo2 Inc. Gaming and I am Van Lee. And on part 1 we discussed what you received through the Hyperdrive Bundle, including characters, ships, resources, and more. I told you a little bit about what it meant to unlock each character, the different factions, and some farms that you possibly could take if you decided to go after that faction. But this is part 2, and in part 2 I'm going to give you 3 suggestions. These are 3 paths that you could take, and this means you farm this team as your A team, this team is your B team, you do this fleet, and this is how you progress. And these 3 paths, I believe, will help you to perform as best as you can in your Galaxy of Heroes journey, and this will give you the best ability to earn the most crystals, to win the most in Grand Arena Championships, to join a great guild, to do everything that you want to do in the game. After telling you about these 3 paths, these 3 options, I'm then going to ask you, the viewer, to tell me what I should do for my brand new account. That's right, I'm starting a new account, I'm purchasing the Hyperdrive Bundle, and then I'm going to farm the teams that you suggest, with a little asterisk here of as long as it's not the one I don't want to do. I don't know, I might even do the one I don't want to do. We'll see how the voting turns out, what people suggest and what people want. I'll have details later on how to vote and what I expect of you guys. So now let's get into these individual paths. I'm going to tell you some starter teams involved with them, secondary teams involved, your fleet, your pros and your cons for each of these paths, and then at the end of it, we'll decide which one you want me to take with the new account. So starting off with the original trilogy path. This one is pretty easy because it's the one that a lot of people have been doing for a while. Although the Phoenix Squad and Rebels takes place before A New Hope, it's pretty much in that original trilogy timeline, right? So that's going to be the team you start with. Phoenix is going to be the big one. It's the easiest to begin with, it's the easiest to master, and it will give you a head start. You'll hit the ground running, and you'll be able to do a lot of great things right at the very beginning of the game. Your other primary team option is one that you start off with just 4 in the faction, but can quickly get 2 of the most important pieces right out of the gate. I'm talking about Empire Sith. And for this team, you're going to have already unlocked Darth Vader, TIE Fighter Pilot, Grand Moff Tarkin, and Count Dooku. So for the other 2 pieces that you can kind of factor in here, they're going to be legendary characters. Fortunately for you, the Phoenix Squad can be used to unlock these 2, and that's going to be Emperor Palpatine, who will be your leader, and Grand Admiral Thrawn, who will be possibly your most important character right when you start playing. I recommend getting those 2 characters unlocked via the journey guide first, and then you can work on these 2 teams concurrently. You also have 2 other options for secondary teams to farm and work on. The first is going to be Rebels, and the reason you're going to work with them is A, they will kind of synergize with the Phoenix Squad. You can move characters in and out. For example, if you have a 3 versus 3 Grand Arena Championships, you can mix and match characters between Rebels and Phoenix and create some good compositions. But the primary reason you'll be working towards Rebels as a secondary team is because you will have a lot of progress in unlocking a hero's journey character, Commander Luke Skywalker, who essentially requires 5 characters to unlock. He requires Stormtrooper Han, Princess Leia, Farm Boy Luke, Old Ben, and R2-D2 to unlock. R2-D2 is also a legendary character, but he requires 5 Empire characters to unlock, which you've thus been able to unlock via your Empire Squad. However, to maximize the Commander Luke Skywalker team, you're going to need to get a couple of other legendary characters unlocked, one of them being the OG Chewbacca. To unlock him, you need bounty hunters. You need 5 of them, and it's a very difficult event. Unlike the Thrawn, Palpatine, or R2-D2 event, or even the Commander Luke Skywalker event, this one requires your characters to be much higher gear levels, and it's a bit of a doozy if you try and do it with lower geared characters. But it's very important to unlock Chewbacca because he's one of the better characters, nonetheless rebels, to own in the game. Bounty hunters also have great ships, so you'll want to keep unlocking their ships as well so you can open up your fleet possibilities. You'll immediately have a couple of really good fleets on your side because you'll have the Phoenix and Rebel Squad, and then you'll have some bounty hunters as well as a few Empire characters as well. So fleet-wise, you're mostly just going to focus on those Rebels, which will include using Home 1 as your capital ship, the Ghost, Phantom 2, Biggs, and Wedge. And then once you get the Bounty Hunters unlocked, you'll be able to go after Han's Millennium Falcon, which requires Chewbacca to pilot. Therefore, your secondary fleet will be either the Executrix, utilizing Grand Moff Tarkin, who you've already leveled up to this point, or you can unlock the Chimera, which is piloted by Grand Admiral Thrawn, who you've also unlocked and upgraded to this point. The pros of utilizing this path, this method to play the game, are that there's not a lot of tough farms involved here. All the characters we've mentioned, for the most part, are either included in the Hyperdrive Bundle or are legendary characters that you can unlock using characters you get via the Hyperdrive Bundle. This is going to be the easiest of the paths to get up and running. There's not a lot of work involved. You can just toss the Phoenix Squad out there and get a couple of extra legendaries, and then boom, you've got several good squads going for you. And there's a very straightforward progression path here. You're going to have the Phoenix, Rebel, and Empire teams, which are going to unlock these legendaries, which are then going to lead to this fleet, which is going to lead to Chewbacca, and this, so on and so forth. So it's very, very easy to see what your next path will be, get on the path, and stick with it. And then finally, you'll also have a very good fleet just up and running quickly. And that's very important. The faster you can get a good fleet out there and start getting a good payout in Fleet Arena, the more crystals you'll have to spend on characters, gear, whatever you want to spend your crystals on. The cons to this path are that Phoenix are essentially pretty worthless once you get to the mid-game. And to be honest, you're going to pretty much be there thanks to the Hyperdrive Bundle. There's not a lot of time that you can utilize to have a leg up on your opponent simply because of that squad. The Empire team is good, but not great. Neither of those two teams perform very well in raids, so you're going to struggle quite a bit to get a good payout in raids, which unfortunately, once you get to the heroic level, is the best place to get high-end gear rather quickly. Eventually, your best team is going to become the Commander Luke Skywalker Rebels, which is not a quote-unquote meta team, and you aren't really set up to get one of the key teams as well. Perhaps if you also focused on Bastila Jedi, which I think you should, but that also means that you're not going to focus on Rebels, or you're not going to focus on whatever the other team is. But if you have them, you can then go into Jedi Knight Revan, but that's the best case scenario. You're no longer going for General Skywalker or one of the Galactic Legends, which are the elite level teams at this point. So you'll be in decent shape for a while, but this is the path that if you take it, you're going to wind up leapfrogged by a lot of people who perhaps chose a different path, which was a little more tough up front, but got to be a little bit easier and better as you progressed. The second farming path that I have for you today is one of the sequel trilogy. Yes, this one includes taking a look at some Resistance characters, First Order characters, and then, of course, our secondary teams. The beauty of this one is that it's a little more open-ended than the original trilogy path because you can actually choose a couple of different ways to go about this. Whereas with the original trilogy path, you pretty much had to go Phoenix, you had to go Rebels, you had to do this, 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 and this. With this sequel trilogy path, the team that you start with can be either the Resistance or the First Order. You're not set in stone with taking one. However, whatever team you make the focal point of this path is the team that you need to stick with until the end, because the idea behind this path is that you're going for a galactic legend, and that's going to be either Rey or Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. This will take a long time, and you will need to have as much discipline as possible to stay on the path, to farm the correct characters, to do the right thing. That way you can unlock them as quickly as possible, even though as quickly as possible is still going to be forever from now. So let's start with the idea that Resistance is going to be your key team, your main team for this farm, and you're going for Galactic Legend Rey. Right out of the gate with the Hyperdrive Bundle, you receive Stick Rey, Finn, Resistance Trooper, Resistance Pilot, Poe, Veteran Smuggler Han Solo, and Veteran Smuggler Chewbacca. Building a team utilizing just these characters is going to be fairly rough. You're not going to have a whole lot of success. You'll do okay in a variety of modes, particularly the Sith raid. I think you can put together an okay team. But ultimately, you need to be working towards unlocking a hero's journey character, legendary character, Jedi Training Rey. To unlock that version of Rey, you need Stick Rey, Finn, BB-8, Vet Smuggler Han, and Vet Smuggler Chewie, all at 7 stars. So your first several farms that you need to pay attention to would be these characters. Now, BB-8 is a legendary character in his own right, and he requires a First Order to unlock. So, unfortunately, you also need to work on a couple of First Order characters. The good news there is that, for the most part, those guys aren't too tough of a farm, so it's not going to really hamper or impede your progress too much. Now, if you stop there, you would have a pretty good resistance team. However, a pretty good resistance team isn't that good in the overall grand scope of things. The good news is there are a couple of newer characters that have been released that can actually kind of revitalize this faction, and I believe you should start working towards unlocking them and getting them to 7 stars fairly quickly out of the gate. Those two characters are called Resistance Hero Poe and Resistance Hero Finn, and they bring pretty much a new mechanic to the game called Inspired. Definitely take a look at their kits because they're a lot more interesting than some of these older characters involved with Jedi Training Rey. Now, from that point, you can kind of start focusing on trying to unlock Galactic Legend Rey, but once again, I will warn you, this is a ways down the road. To attempt the event, you have to unlock an absolute ton of requirements. I'll go through them here for you. You need R2-D2, C-3PO, BB-8, Poe, Finn, Vet Smuggler Chewbacca, Stick Rey, Vet Smuggler Han, Resistance Trooper, Resistance Pilot, Resistance Hero Poe, Resistance Hero Finn, Rose Tico, Jedi Training Rey, and finally Emmeline Holdo. But here's the thing, you don't just need those characters at 7 stars, which is a feat unto itself. You also need them to be at various relic levels, generally relic level 5 or relic level 7, with all of their ability levels maxed out. So this is no easy feat. Just put your head down, start putting in the work, and you'll be closer than you would think before you know it. If you decide you don't want to work on Resistance, instead you have the option of focusing on First Order, because the other galactic legend that has been released is Supreme Leader Kylo Ren, and of course he requires a majority of First Order characters, plus those extra random ones that aren't necessarily related to the faction, but play a role in The Rise of Skywalker and the other movies in the sequel trilogy. Through the Hyperdrive Bundle, if you're looking at First Order characters, you automatically are given Kylo Ren Unmasked, Kylo Ren, Captain Phasma, First Order Officer, First Order Stormtrooper, and First Order Executioner. Now, this team, to be honest, is better, in my opinion, than the Resistance team right out of the gate. I think it has some better mechanics to it and more utility. You can have actually a pretty good defensive team immediately because you're not actually needing another legendary character to take this team to the next level. Of the 6 characters that you receive, you'll of course utilize 5 of them in most events, so the top team that you can field is a bit debatable. It also depends on really what you're doing. If you're looking at maybe holding your spot in Squad Arena, I like to have that extra second tank, which is First Order Stormtrooper, because I also think he's a pretty solid, underrated tank. But if you're playing maybe a more offensive game or trying to beat a team that you know you can handle, Captain Phasma might be a better option for that 5th because she can lower opponents' TM as well as provide advantage to your team, which is pretty much crucial to winning battles as the First Order. Now, much like the Resistance Squad, there are a couple of newer characters that were released fairly recently that can kind of revitalize this squad, and I recommend going after both of them as quickly as you can. They are, of course, the Sith Trooper and General Hux. Both of these characters are very good in their own right. General Hux can help stop opponents' turn meter gain using his Zeta, and his lead ability can be better than Kylo Ren Unmasked in some scenarios. And he's just a great support character to have in your lineup. Sith Trooper brings a ton of damage to this squad. I'm even saying once you get him around gear 10, particularly with a Hux lead, he can still do massive amounts of damage, 20, 25,000 plus, even at those low levels. bit squishy, so you'll definitely want Kylo Ren unmasked in that team, or at the very least First Order Stormtrooper to provide a tank to keep him protected. There is no legendary character to chase after for the First Order like there is Jedi training Rey for the Resistance, so you really don't have to kind of focus on that early, and instead you can just start working towards Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. Now, much like with Rey, boy, there's a lot of stuff to get here. You'll need to have the following characters: Captain Phasma, Emperor Palpatine, First Order Executioner, First Order Officer, First Order Special Forces TIE Pilot, First Order TIE Pilot, First Order Stormtrooper, General Hux, Kylo Ren Unmasked, Sith Trooper, Veteran Smuggler Han Solo, and lastly, the Finalizer Capital Ship. For the characters, you'll need them, again, at various levels of relics, 3, 5, and 7, and then the Finalizer you need at 5 stars. Same thing with Rey here. You just have to put your head down, work hard, and eventually you'll be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Once you've selected your primary focus by going after either First Order or Resistance, you can then move on to your secondary teams. Now, one of the true beauties of selecting this path is that the secondary team options are wide open. Unlike in the original trilogy plan, you don't actually have to work towards this secondary squad because it unlocks this legendary character, so on and so forth. So really, just go with whatever characters you like or the modes you want to be most successful in. I am going to suggest clones to everyone because clones are amazing. They'll help you win the heroic Sith raids. They will set you up for long-term success. But you can also utilize Night Sisters, Jedi, Imperial Troopers, Bounty Hunters, anyone. It's whatever characters you want to put your focus on. Honestly, in the first part of the Hyperdrive Bundle series, I talked about the Imperial Troopers being a team that you really shouldn't concern yourself with at the time because they're just not that good. I could make the argument that they're a perfect secondary squad here because they're not going to take a lot of attention away from your primary focus and instead are going to be a team that you can slap together, put a couple of gear levels on, start working on, and they'll help you out. They'll be able to be your secondary squad. But ultimately, this is whatever you want to do. Personally, if you're asking what I would do, I would certainly go after clones for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, but I would also go after bounty hunters simply because they're going to allow you to unlock Bosk's ship, the Houndstooth, and you'll need it, A, to unlock the Finalizer, and B, to perform well in fleets at all. So definitely keep an eye on bounty hunters as a secondary team, pretty much no matter what you do, simply because of how important their ships are, particularly, again, Bosk's Houndstooth. Now, speaking of fleets, when you've selected the sequel trilogy path, it can be a bit dicey in this regard, simply because both the Resistance and First Order fleets require a lot to get going, and you won't be able to unlock the Raddus or the Finalizer for quite some time, which would be the key capital ships for your various factions. Now, if you want to spend some money, you can buy those shards and maybe get up and running a little bit quickly, but that might take a hearty chunk of cash, and I understand if you don't want to invest that much more in that kind of squad because ultimately they're not that good once all is said and done. So this ultimately is going to depend on really what you're doing with your secondary farms. If you chose to go after clones, you can actually utilize Fives' ship and perhaps Clone Sergeant's ship and maybe build a squad out of that. If you went after bounty hunters, you'll have the bounty hunter ships as well, and you've already unlocked them too. So that's definitely a viable option. So ultimately, I believe that if you're not going to buy the Raddus or the Finalizer out of the gate, no matter whether you selected Resistance or First Order for your key team, I think there's a common ground that you can go after. Again, change this depending on who you chose your secondary teams to be, but I definitely foresee an option of using the Executrix as your capital ship, using TIE Silencer, which is Kylo Ren's ship, the Slave 1, Vulture Droid, Xanadu Blood, and IG-2000 to kind of get up and running and get started. Particularly if you chose First Order, you can kind of start leaning into that Finalizer squad, which is, in my opinion, a little bit better than the Raddus. So you'll want to work on those secondary characters from First Order, including First Order TIE Pilot, First Order Special Forces TIE Pilot, and work on getting Kylo's command shuttle, which is not great at the lower levels and below 7 stars, but once you get it up there, it can be kind of a tricky piece to deal with. Let's take a look at the pros and cons of selecting the sequel trilogy path, starting with the pros. With the new additions to each of these factions, both First Order and Resistance are now really good overall teams. They're, of course, not the elite level teams, but they're still very, very good. And unlike if you went with the original trilogy path, you don't have a team like Phoenix on your roster negatively impacting your GP and just bringing your overall teams down a bit. Both Resistance and First Order are good enough that they're going to give people trouble in Grand Arena Championships, Territory Wars, etc. The other good thing about this path is, of course, that the secondary team options are so wide and diverse that you can do whatever you want to do as a fan. If you like watching the Clone Wars TV show, then you'll probably like having a clone team on your roster. If you're a big fan of Jedi, then you can run a Jedi team, and it will ultimately make you better for it. So choose wisely, but play the way you want to play. Play to have fun. And then finally, the biggest perk to selecting this path is that you're on the way to Galactic Legends. You're on the way to having the best characters in the game, and we probably won't see a new Galactic Legend, in my opinion, for at least another 6 months. Maybe at the end of 2020, but I highly doubt that. So you're well on your way to having the elite team in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. As for the cons, there's a big one here. It's that you're essentially going after a Galactic Legend, which will take you forever. It's going to be a long time before you can really reap the rewards of selecting this path. So keep in mind, this path is not for you if you're someone who maybe gets distracted or someone who can't see the forest for the trees and might go off in a different path halfway through. You need to commit to it if you select this path, because it will take a long time to get where you need to go. There's also no real quick path to an elite team. You can't really start going after Jedi Knight Revan or Darth Revan right out of the gate, because you're going to have to focus on your First Order or your Resistance team. So there's no real middle ground where you're going to have the team that everyone struggles to beat early. And then finally, the last con I will list for selecting this path is that your fleets are questionable. Unlike the last path, the original trilogy path, there's no real set-in-stone way to go about putting together a good fleet. It's going to be a bit more aimless for a while, and it's also not going to get as good as quickly, whereas with the original trilogy, you could have Han's Falcon and the Ultimate Rebel Squad up and running really quickly. With this one, there's just no path to having that elite squad really immediately. So that does it for the sequel trilogy path. This is a fun one. This is one that I think if you decide to go this way, you can have a really interesting roster that doesn't, like I said, doesn't come to fruition quickly, but when it does is going to be amazing. Once you get Galactic Legend Rey or Supreme Leader Kylo Ren up and running, you're going to be unstoppable for quite some time. So if fans out there, if you select this one for me as far as what I should do with the new account, I would be totally happy with that. I think this one's going to be a little bit more fun than the original trilogy path, and I think there's enough wide open options here that you can really make the roster your own. You will be different from probably everyone else if you select this path, even though it's just one of 3 paths. And here we are with the final of the 3 paths, and it is, you guessed it, a prequel trilogy path. And, you know, to be honest, when I set out to make this, I did not have it in mind that it would be aligning with the 3 different Star Wars trilogies, but it kind of panned out that way, and that puts a nice little bow on it. The prequel path, in my opinion, doesn't pay off quite as well as the sequel path, where you end up with a Galactic Legend, but it is still far and above better than the results if you would have gone about doing the original trilogy path, because the ultimate end game here with this path is unlocking and using General Anakin Skywalker, or GAS, which is, as of recording, the 3rd best team in the game and a very, very good team, and one of my personal favorites, to be honest. This path is quite a bit more laser-focused than the sequel trilogy path in that these are the teams you need to work on, these are the characters you need to work on, but I also find these teams to be a little more fun to play as because they're newer. Phoenix is somewhat of an old team. Rebels, Empire, these are older teams, but the teams we'll talk about today, including the Clones, Jedi, Separatists, Geonosians, those are teams that have been made within the last year or so, I'd say, and they're fun. They're a lot of fun to play, and these will also set you up on a path to succeed in both. Well, definitely succeed in the dark side Geonosis territory battle, and prepare to succeed in the light side Geonosis territory battle, which is very difficult to succeed in. So, starting off with our main teams, there are two of them, and I suppose you could go either way with which is your 1A and which is your 1B, but for the most part, you know how it's going to end up. I'm, of course, talking about clones. Right out of the gate via the Hyperdrive Bundle, you receive Rex, Echo, Fives, Cody, and Sarge. And like I said on part 1 of this video series, even though that's not the optimal team, it still is a beast of a team for a couple of reasons. Primarily because of the faction within a faction. What I mean by that is all of these clones have the Clone Trooper tag, but only a few of them have the 501st tag. That would be Rex, Echo, Fives, and ARC Trooper, as well as Ahsoka and General Skywalker. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. But the 501st Clone Troopers, as in the characters that have both of those tags, I know, confusing, have a very interesting mechanic revolving around Fives. Fives has a unique ability which, once zetaed, states that if another 501st Clone Trooper ally basically gets killed, gets dropped down to 1 health, Fives will instead sacrifice himself, healing the character for so much max health, but more importantly, giving them his max health, max protection, speed, and offense. This essentially turns the remaining 501st members into absolute beasts. Suddenly they're doing a ton of damage. They are taking turns constantly. Because of all of this, combined with the fact that Rex actually has an Annihilate attack, which can do an infinite number of damage, you can destroy raids. You can destroy teams that are better than you. You can just destroy anything you go up against, with the exception of a few minor details to that. But either way, this essentially just means that clones are an elite team. I believe that you should immediately make them a focus, although there are 2 other characters, one that I've already mentioned, that you need to start working on to make this team as good as it can be. ARC Trooper is one. It's a straight-up 16 energy Cantina node farm. Not too bad. The other one, though, is a little tougher. It's Shock T, the Jedi Master. She is only available on a fleet node, so you need to work on your fleet as best you can to unlock her as quickly as you can. She's a rough farm, but once you have her, the sky's the limit, particularly as far as defeating raids. So Shock T should be a major focus. The 1B team that you will be focusing on here as part of your main teams is going to involve a faction that really synergizes well with Clone Troopers, because Clone Troopers are a part of it. I'm talking, of course, about Galactic Republic. We'll also toss in an extra Jedi in there, as you'll see shortly. And this faction is useful because not only are they good, but also because once you get to the General Skywalker part of the stage of the game, you're going to have a couple of teams you're going to mix and match here that are going to synergize really, really well. This faction includes Jedi Knight Anakin, Ahsoka Tano, Qui-Gon Jinn, Mace Windu, Clone Wars Chewbacca, and finally an extra Jedi, because they will be an excellent leader for a little while until you get the proper leaders in place, and that is Bastila Shan. Bastila will remain your best Jedi leader until you can unlock Padme Amidala, which is going to be your first key focus for these couple of teams. As far as the additional farms you want to do to kind of complement this team, much like you would with ARC Trooper and Shock T for the clones, there is Barriss Offee, who provides a really nice anti-crit chance ability where you actually heal yourself for so much health anytime the opponent critically hits you. General Kenobi, who you will unlock via the heroic tank raid and is quite possibly the best tank in the game and will fit right in on your Padme squad. And then finally Grandmaster Yoda, who is one of the easiest legendaries to get, where you just need to utilize 5 Jedi to unlock him. And guess what? How many Jedi did we list earlier? 5 of them. So you will be able to unlock Grandmaster Yoda at 5 stars immediately after purchasing the Hyperdrive Bundle. Now, looking into your secondary teams and their farms, there are 2 of them that you really want to focus on that go hand in hand with the Clones Galactic Republic group, and that would be the Separatists and the Geonosians. The primary reason you're going to focus on working on these teams would be that Separatists are required to unlock Padme, much in the same way that Jedi are required to unlock Grandmaster Yoda, or First Order is required to unlock BB-8. So you'll need 5 Separatists, and just like how clones are also part of Galactic Republic, Geonosians are actually part of the Separatists. So you don't necessarily have to have 5 Separatists and 5 Geonosians, although eventually you will want that so you can have 2 separate teams. The characters I will highlight as far as strictly Separatists are Count Dooku, Newt Gunray, and Asajj Ventress. Then with the Geonosians, honestly, they're worthless until you have the one key Geonosian, which is the Geonosian Brood Alpha, but you'll need all 5 to have a successful, usable team. Those 5 total are Brood Alpha, Poggle the Lesser, Geonosian Spy, Geonosian Soldier, and Sun Fac. When it was first released, the Padme event was tough. It was very difficult to do, and primarily you ended up having to use Separatist droids, including General Grievous, which you'll want to start working on Grievous pretty early because it's a long farm. Try and farm him from the fleet shop. Don't necessarily rely on shard shop. In fact, I'm not sure I ever spent any of my shard currency on Grievous. Instead, I just took it all the way through fleet. But it's a long farm. Don't expect to have him immediately. So early on, you had to have Grievous, and it was still a very difficult event. And then shortly after releasing the event, CG reworked several of the Separatists and all of the Geonosians, and the faction is really, really good now. The Geonosians, much like Night Sisters, are a very gimmicky squad, one of the most so in this game, and they require very specific counters to beat. Or you can utilize them on offense in Grand Arena Championships and Territory Wars, and they can really punch above their level. So for the Padme event, you have a couple of options here, but just know that if you work on these 8 Separatists/Geos, you're going to have a really easy time taking care of the event and unlocking one of the best characters in this game. Moving on to your fleets, you have a couple of options as far as which ones you utilize as your key fleets. I think right out of the gate, you should be focusing on the characters that you've already built up and are going to use for the foreseeable future, and that includes the Grand Republic ships. That's Ahsoka Tano's Starfighter, Anakin Starfighter, Clone Sergeant's ARC 170, and Fives' Umbaran Starfighter. Now, I have said in the past that Mace Windu and his Endurance capital ship is the worst of all of them, and it is. However, it's somewhat useful for a couple of reasons. Number one, because it synergizes well with Galactic Republic ships. And then number two, you will probably need it for the General Anakin Skywalker event, even though that's a long ways away, because it will take a little while before you have good enough teams and a roster to take on the Geonosis territory battle for even the dark side, which is quite a bit easier than the light side, or you can unlock General Kenobi's Negotiator capital ship, which is one of, if not the best in the game right now. In the meantime, you're going to be working on Mace probably as it is for a bit, and it's a quick, easy way to get your ships up and running. The second fleet that you're going to have is probably going to become your best fleet early, is one that's going to utilize a bunch of the Geonosians as well as a couple of Separatist ships. So once you get them unlocked, you're going to be utilizing the Geonosian Spy Starfighter, Geonosian Soldier Starfighter, and Sun Fac Starfighter, as well as the Vulture Droid and Hyena Bomber. Now, as far as a lead ship, I would go with the Executrix. It has a really nice ultimate. It's just a solid entry-level capital ship, and it remains fairly useful even late into the game. Once you have these ships ready and have farmed them a little bit, kind of play around. Find out which one works better for you. Early on, that's going to be Galactic Republic ships with the Endurance, but eventually there will come a time that those Geonosian ships can do some real damage for you, and the Hyena Bomber is a very solid tank that if you're not going to work on the Houndstooth, Bosk's Houndstooth, it will do an applicable job provided you're using the other Separatist ships. So it's definitely a good option and a viable option once you've farmed a few of those ships. And then lastly, let's talk pros and cons of utilizing this farming path. On the pros side of things, right out of the gate, you're going to have the best raid team in the game, aside from Galactic Legends, immediately. You'll have those clones ready to go, and although Shaak Ti is the best lead for a clone raid team, Rex works just fine for a little bit, particularly up until you get to the Heroic Sith raid, in which case you can still pump out several million damage and find yourself in the top 5 easily. This farming path also sets you up to have an elite team as well as an elite fleet somewhat quickly compared to the others. It certainly wouldn't take as long as getting to a Galactic Legend, but it takes a little bit longer than getting to whatever the sequel trilogy in-game might be for you, whether that's Jedi Knight Revan or just sticking with Empire or whatever it may be. I'm, of course, talking about General Anakin Skywalker's 501st. That will be your best team in the game. We get to that point, and it will remain a very viable team for quite some time, I imagine. And then also the Negotiator, General Kenobi's capital ship, will be your best fleet, and it will be using a lot of those Galactic Republic ships that you're working on right now. But in addition to putting you on the path to having one of the best teams in the game, it also puts you on a path to have one of the best teams in the game, but it won't take as long. I'm talking about Padme's squad. It is probably the easiest squad to get early that is insanely good. Doesn't quite perform as well in raids as, say, Jedi Knight Revan's squad, but it performs well enough, and you're pretty much going to unlock it just because you're already working on the General Anakin Skywalker squad. So that's definitely a good perk. And likely as soon as you unlock Padme, the team will be good enough to take your top spot on your squad in several game modes, including Squad Arena. Moving on to the cons to selecting this farming path, there aren't any. No, I'm kidding. There are a couple, including that there are some really tough farms to be had here. On their own, Arc Trooper and the Geonosian Brood Alpha don't constitute exceptionally difficult farms, but taken together, Cantina farms can be a bit tough. Also include with that the fact that you need to get Shaak Ti off of a fleet node that's hard to unlock. That makes it a little bit difficult to actually get set up and running. I think you'll have good enough squads in the meantime that you'll be able to compete in most game modes, but there's probably a chance that someone that might have taken the sequel trilogy path or even the original trilogy path has a couple of better teams than you have right now because you're waiting on a couple of those high-end farms. And then finally, to have your optimal teams, there's a lot of things you need to do. You need to work on this to have Brood Alpha, which makes all of the Geonosians viable. You need to have this to have a good Separatist squad, this to have a good Jedi Grand Republic squad. So there are lots of pieces that you need to work on. It's not quite as straightforward as either the sequel trilogy path or the original trilogy path, but the payoff is going to be better earlier than certainly the original trilogy path, and better than the sequel trilogy path for a long time, right up until they get their Galactic Legends, in which case you're probably still going to be able to compete with them in almost any scenario. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will do it for my two-part series on the Hyperdrive Bundle. I hope this particular episode gave you some insight into a few things you can do after purchasing the bundle, maybe some paths to keep you on the right track to optimizing your roster and having the best, most competitive time you can while still focusing on the teams that you personally want to focus on. As I've mentioned plenty of times before, I am starting a brand new account. I've also purchased the Hyperdrive Bundle, and I'm going to utilize you guys, the listeners, to help me make decisions as we progress through the life of this account. So I want everyone to vote on which one of these three paths you want me to take on my new account. If you think it would be funny to watch me suffer through the original trilogy plan and having to gear up Phoenix, then by all means vote for that one. If you would like to see me eventually unlock the Galactic Legends, then vote for the sequel trilogy plan. Maybe you just prefer the Resistance Squad or the First Order Squad, or maybe you just want to see me be as competitive as possible right out of the gate and you want me to try the prequel path. Whatever it may be, go vote, because I will honor whatever you guys vote for. I believe I'll commit. Even if you vote for the first option, I will commit. I will stick with Phoenix. I will do Rebels. I will do that whole squad, despite that being the worst one. Whatever it may be, thank you so much for tuning in. Get out there and vote. Check me out on Twitter at ManlyVanLee. Head on over to my Patreon if you think I'm doing great work and I deserve a couple of bucks. And stay tuned for some awesome stuff coming up here on Boo2 Inc. Gaming.
Boo2 Inc. Gaming. America #1.